What's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. And how are you?
I'm good.
So you and I were watching a documentary called Outcry. It was on Hulu.
It was on Paramount.
Okay. So it's crazy. I highly recommend that you watch this. It's an old case, but there was a Texas Ranger that came on the television, and I told Clint, you better hope that I never see that man when I'm in Texas. And of course, it's because he's wearing, his badge and his nice belt. He's getting ready to go up in the courtroom to testify, and he has his cowboy hat on. And then that conversation turned into me saying, Clint, I want to sock that man in the face. And I'm sharing that with you because today's episode, we're going to talk about the psychology of the uniform and basically how it really can alter the way that people treat you.
That is... When we look at a use of force continuum, that is the first level of force. That when you're showing up on scene there's your uniform presence is the biggest show of, look, I'm the authority here and you're going to listen to me. And I think people don't recognize that or they lose that for themselves, or they don't have confidence in it if they're wearing it, that it creates that dynamic of where you walk up, you have this uniform on, you're showing like, hey, you have to listen to me, you have to do what I say, and you have to respect me. But if you walk in and you're weak and modest about it, then people are going to shift their mindset. And I think that's the perfect example of it when you talked about the Texas Ranger is you see that presence coming your way. The mental note is being, okay, I have to listen to this person. And then they walk up and
my mental note is like, that guy's hot. He's probably about 50 years old. He's got some graying hair, but continue.
No. But in that mindset of you lose respect for someone when they come up to you and start using curse words, they're talking down to you and they're disrespecting you. They're not controlling the situation through this dynamic and this mental thought you have about that individual to where that respect gets thrown out. And then now that whole mindset you initially had is out the window, and you start having that same mindset for other law enforcement people who show up, and it creates such a downward spiral for it.
Okay, so I love how you explained that. And it's so interesting to me because I'm thinking about how we've had this big push of humanizing the badge, right? And so I think that what a lot of people don't actualize, especially in the kind of sphere of influence that we have in the media and such, is that when you wear the uniform, you become a symbol, not a person.
Yeah, and you're a part of a bigger symbol associated to it.
So when strangers come up to you, they're speaking to the badge. They're not speaking to the human behind it, especially during times of conflict or crisis. So it can make you feel invisible. And if you're constantly performing a role instead of living as yourself, then that could be a very difficult thing to balance.
And that's why it's important to be able to bring out your human nature side in wearing the badge, because those people will be able to see just beyond the badge and be like, oh, they're actually a person too. They're not some robot that's just showing up and taking a report and being done with it. But there's a balance with it, because I think it could be overly done as well. And that's where you have to walk that line is use your human nature side, but then use your badge when you need to push that.
So a lot of times too, family and friends are going to see you as always on. So a lot of the times, we definitely experience this. You're going to have people, loved ones, come to you for every tough conversation, emergencies. Sometimes they think you're an attorney and they call for legal advice. This will happen because of that uniform that you wear. And a lot of the times this can create a lot of emotional fatigue. I have seen a lot of spouses get upset over this type of thing. And if you are not supported, it can create a sticky situation.
Yeah, you need to create that dynamic. And I think that's where we as the law enforcement personnel need to create that dynamic for ourselves and explain to people, look, I understand you want help on this situation all the time, but I didn't create that for you. And I don't have any control over it. So you're going to have to just deal with it.
Other officers will judge you because of the way that you look. And what I mean by that is they will have this appearance-based bias. And this can be because of the gear setup that you have. This can be because of your grooming, how squared away you look. And so realizing that as an officer and wearing a uniform that you are a symbol, it is so important to make sure that you're presenting that symbol in the best way possible.
Absolutely. That's, like I said in the very beginning, your uniform presence is your first recognition of that control, of that power that you hold. And if you look like a mess and you're unkept and you don't know how to manage yourself, then people are going to think that, how is this guy going to help me?
Civilians are going to react based on their past experiences or the media. So people are either going to be overly respectful or they're automatically going to mistrust you and probably hate you without even knowing you personally.
And it's so funny, like, I love it when people distrust me and they don't like me at all, because I kill them with kindness and show them that human side of things, to where afterwards they're like, I wasn't expecting this. I'm like, well, you put me in the same bucket as a different experience you had, so that's on you.
You're treated differently in the public even when you're off duty. If you're one of those officers who likes to wear just certain law enforcement apparel, thin blue line gear. Clint has never once been of this in this group. And so it can, if you're like that, and that's your thing, right? You go into your wardrobe and every other shirt is something thin blue line or law enforcement related, or every hat that you put on or the sticker on your vehicle, like all of that stuff, it's going to make it very difficult to mentally disconnect from the job, even when you're not on shift and even when you're not realizing that you're still keeping yourself in it, even when you're clocked out.
Yeah, you need to create that separation. If you are always identifying as this is who I am and you're identifying as the badge, then you don't know who you are necessarily as an individual outside of that. And eventually it's always going to come to an end. You're going to retire. You're going to move on to a different career path, whatever it may be. You need to create that separation to know who you are as an individual.
Yeah, and take the badge off at home, both mentally and physically. Change your clothes, change your pace. Let your family and the people around you interact with the real you and not the role, because you're not that in real life, right? You're just that for work. And I think it's important too to make sure that you're teaching the family and your friends what the uniform means and what it doesn't. And we do that by creating boundaries around how you talk about the job, when you want to talk about work, when those boundaries exist to where you're not going to be discussing work or answering those types of questions.
And it makes me laugh that you said, like, be able to identify as something else. As I don't play a cop in real life. I play one on TV. Like, that was the first thing that came to mind for me. And in reality, that's how it should be. You shouldn't always identify that. Know how to have that on-off switch to turn it on when you have to and turn it off when you don't.
Yeah, and I think too that when we have the ability to just have a space to explore who we are without having to have any kind of emotional or physical attachment to those things of work, like when you think about it, I'm thinking about doctors because I managed peds for 14 years, but like you don't have doctors going around and like having a bunch of doctor swag and having like, I'm a doctor on their car, like, you know,
wearing a stethoscope wherever you go.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, nurses is really the only other profession that I can think of to where I'm a nurse.
Firefighters.
Well, I'm talking outside of like first responders, because a lot of military, like, but like nurses really is the only one that comes to mind for me. Yeah. So it's kind of silly when we stop and actually think about it, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think we have, as a society, have put so much onto our profession, and that's who we identify as, and we need to get away from that. We need to identify as our own person.
Yeah, the uniform commands respect, but it can also build walls. And it's so important for us to understand that so that we can distinguish how we live our lives. I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.